Well, thank you for everyone for being here today. We're coming from you live from WeWork in downtown DC in the Rhode Island location. We're so excited to be in day 3 of DC Startup Week, a 5-day conference every September focusing on growing the startup and founder ecosystem here in the DMV. My name is Rachel Kretzy. I'm the organizer of DC Startup Week and a founder of a tech startup myself named UPace. I want to say a quick thank you to all of our sponsors that allowed to make this week possible. Throughout the 5 days, we have about 4,000 attendees, completely free for everyone coming. And we wouldn't be able to do that without the support of our amazing sponsors. Just to name a few of our title sponsors: Next, powered by Shulman Rogers, Technology Rivers, Insperity, and Wiz. Thank you so much for all your support to let us be here today. With that said, for the first year, we're having this culture track. I talked to Amira, the founder and CEO of Manifesta, just a couple of months ago about this idea of the importance of culture with startups, especially during this time. Always important, but especially during this time of COVID-19, of going through this pandemic, the switch of working remotely and being at home, and what does that mean for culture? How do you grow that? And that fostered this culture tracks. With that said, thank you so much, Amira, for putting this together. And I'm so excited for this conversation today. So with Amira, I'll let you take it from here.
Amazing. Thank you, Rachel. I am so glad and grateful to be here with all of you. This culture track has been a real labor of love from dozens of founders and entrepreneurs and executives and consultants who've come together to bring their insight and expertise to help you lead with more intention, more compassion, and really bring your values to life in ways that not only engage and inspire your people, but also create more business success. So with that being said, I'll give you just a little bit of advice. If you're somebody who really loves culture or is leading a business and is interested in attending more of our sessions this week, go ahead and download the guide to the culture track at manifesta.co/startupweek. You will find space to take notes digitally and save those notes. You'll also automatically be signed up to get a full recap of the entire week's worth of sessions, plus recommended reading, listening, and tools from every single one of our speakers. So I highly recommend that you do that. And now I get to introduce our incredible speakers. So I feel incredibly lucky to interview these two badass women who said yes to sharing their insight and experience with all of you and with me today. And so I have, drum roll, I wish I had a drum roll, Susan Tynan, who is the founder of Framebridge, the district darling of the startup world here. And Susan, prior to Framebridge, spent time in product and corporate development for several startups. For those of you who don't know Framebridge, I love this company. I have a personal relationship with this company. I was one of their first customers. I joke that most of their executive team has actually been inside my home because they started right before I bought my first place. And so they're an incredible startup. They have revolutionized the framing industry and modernized custom framing. Highly recommend that you check them out. Susan is a mom to 2 girls. We were just talking about what it's like to be a girl mom and a boy mom with both Susan and Zuhairah. We also have Zuhairah Washington, who is a senior vice president at Expedia. Zuhairah is also a former founder. She has lived all over the world, in Dubai, which is near my hometown, London, Barcelona, before returning to the States to run Uber DC. Zuhairah has 3 kids, loves to travel, and is probably sad that she can't do so right now, but we will get back to that life soon at some point. Zuhairah first came to DC as a college intern on the Hill for Maxine Waters, which is really cool and amazing. Like, what a cool path you've been on, Zuhairah. So I feel super privileged to introduce both of you. You can both unmute yourselves now and just kind of say hello to everybody who's here with us.
Hello, excited to be here.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Oh, good. I see some faces.
Yeah, you see some faces. I see some faces too. So for everyone who is on this session, thanks for joining. We will be having an in-depth conversation for maybe the first 40 minutes and then open it up for questions. Both Susan and Zuhairah have generously offered to answer any questions that you all have, whether you're a founder or who's running a team right now, someone who's scaling their company and growing really fast, or maybe a first-time entrepreneur or a future entrepreneur who's just curious, how do we bridge business operations and cultivating great workplace culture? So I will be opening it up for questions after we have our conversation. So please drop your questions into the chat. You can do so throughout our time together. Just do this. Just start your question with the word question. Really easy. That being said, we will jump right into our conversation. So we, Susan and Zuhairah, we've talked quite a bit about culture and what it's like as operators to not just build a business, to scale that business, but really to build a team and to cultivate workplace culture that enables business success. So to level set our conversation today, we'd love to set a baseline of definitions based on your deep experience. So I'll start with you, Susan. I'm going to ask both of you to answer this question. How do you define culture?
Well, I once heard actually an elementary school definition of integrity, which was doing the right thing even if nobody knows, which I thought was a great definition. And I think culture is a lot of the same. It's really how people behave toward one another, what they value, prioritize, how they make decisions without close direction. It's really how the organization acts without being explicit, how it would naturally act.
I love that. It's like how you behave when no one's watching, right? That phrase. Zuhairah, how about you? How do you define culture?
I would say the definition that's most apt in my experience with organizations is culture is who the organization hires and who the organization fires. It's also culture is who the organization promotes and who the organization demotes. To Susan's point, it's behaviors. It's not what's written on the wall. It's what's reinforced in terms of behaviors and actions and sentiment, and all of those things are embodied in the people that are on your team. And despite what may be hanging on the wall, those signals of promotion, hire, fire, I think speak multiples in terms of volume and really reinforcing and building culture.
You are singing my tune. 100% agree with both of you there. So we are, this year has been transformational in so many ways, for us as individuals, for our families, for our businesses. And, the theme of the culture track this year is reinventing work, right? We have this moment in time. We've never had the chance like we have right now to rethink and rewrite how we work together. And so I'm curious, in each of your teams, right? You both work in different kinds of organizations. What shifts have you seen in your workplace, especially as it relates to employee expectations and the workplace culture, like the feel of the place? I'm curious to see what shifts you're seeing, especially, you know, I know Susan, in your case, you have teams that are virtual and you have teams that are on site. And so I'm curious what shifts you're seeing from that perspective as well.
Want me to start?
Please do.
Okay. So I keep describing the period of early COVID as sort of March, April was a different thing. And so I feel like there was so much sort of pressure testing on culture as we had to make really hard decisions and navigate through that time. So that I feel like that would be an interesting topic to discuss, because I think you have to have a pretty strong culture to make good decisions in that period. But I think during this ongoing period of work from home, we have our corporate team who can work from home easily, and then we have manufacturing facility and retail stores that cannot. And so one, I would say, I'm proud of this about our culture. I would say our team cares about how we're treating all teams, which is important. So the safety of folks in our factory matters to software engineers who very comfortably work from home. And so I think that's both the nature of sort of, I think, how people are today, just more aware, and hopefully of the type of people we've attracted. I think we have had to be much more explicit and tell our managers to be more explicit about how people are doing from a mental health perspective. And figure out how we can give a little bit of grace there. You know, certainly as a leader, I have been trying to say, like, you know, we're Zoom schooling from home, what, you know, it's a catastrophe, and just try and sort of reveal what I'm dealing with, but also really to tell managers not to just ask how are people doing, but really try and dig in and be more specific. And then we've just tried to do things like more work blocks with no meetings where you can schedule, telling people that they have the flexibility just to block off time in their day. You know, but the problems are bigger than just what we can solve with a few nice policies. And so I think it's going to be up to us sort of more broadly as business leaders to figure out how we even re-onboard or accelerate the careers of people who had to take time off because of this time. I mean, there's a lot unfolding.
Oh, you're on mute, Amira.
Thanks, Zuhairah. That's a really good point about re-onboarding. And also, what will it look like when we're all back actually live together? There will be a reorientation, a re-meeting of the minds.
I will say that because I was all gloom and doom. We, you know, surveyed folks, talked to people. There is like a really serious silver lining that is amazing of people enjoying spending time with their families, enjoying the pets they're adopting, enjoying cooking more. People are saying they're exercising a lot more. And so I think, we were full-time in the office and very much full-time, meaning busting on both sides of 9 to 5. So probably more like we were like 9 to 6:30. I don't think anyone would be up for that again. I really think that will be permanently changed.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, Zuhairah, how about you? What shifts are you seeing in your workplace?
My team is global, and about a little over half is remote, meaning full-time. So it's been, you know, more disruptive for some folks than others. I think a few things I've observed. One, a large chunk of my team is sales or accounts focused. And so when you have high performing, results oriented folks who don't have a metric or a North Star, if you will, in terms of revenue that they're generating, you have to find a new way to focus that energy. Otherwise, people get a sense of uneasiness. And so it's caused me to increase my level of communication, to be very mindful about how I'm communicating, to speak openly about recognizing the wins that people are generating, even if they're not showing up on the top line, and encouraging the right behaviors during this time. I'm in the travel industry, so there's no secret that it's been dramatically impacted in our results. I mean, we are a publicly traded company, so to the tune of, you know, over 80% in our last earnings. And so it is impacting us on a very real level. A lot of people are in the company because they love to travel. So not being able to travel, you're getting a bit of that itch. But I think it's also having us to look deeper for why we are with the company, why we are in this industry. And I think particularly in this moment in time, we've talked about COVID and the global pandemic, but within the U.S. context as well, kind of the racial justice movement that's happening. I think a lot of us take a sense of pride and also have a sense of purpose in playing a role in connecting people across boundaries and barriers and being in travel, and what that allows people to do and how it changes their perspective on the world. And so honing in on that, and even myself, I mean, typical type A, you run. To Susan's point, it's been great to take a breath a bit. And I'll be the first to admit, I did that reluctantly a bit, where it's like, I need to work. And it's like, well, actually, you can stop and actually, have lunch at 12:30, with your elementary school colleague across the aisle. You can do that. So making space to try to create special moments. We have a little handmade sign on my office door with an X and a smiley face so my little guys know. And so they often send little notes under the door. I was sharing that with a colleague. And so I have some of the notes, which are, handwritten. These are just cherished, moments. And I think as a leader in terms of culture, it's important to share that, with my team, right? We've all seen the scene in little kid coming behind, to embrace those moments, because this is a time that we're living through together, and we need to meet it with humanity.
That's really powerful. You shared a lot just now, and one thing that you just shared that I would love to dig deeper on is around your leadership and how you model and what you model makes such a big difference for your employees in terms of their ability to feel like they have space to be, right? And have space to express themselves or operate in a certain way. And oftentimes, I'll hear this a lot when we're doing culture assessments, that people don't feel like they can breathe or take a break or share something personal because their CEO or their executive director is always on. And so they feel like, oh my goodness, well, if she's always doing that, then I sure can't take a break for lunch. And so I think that's a beautiful example of how leaders set the tone for culture. So that's a great jumping off point for our next question. What do you as leaders, leaders of teams, leaders of companies, believe is most critical in cultivating strong, healthy internal culture? Zuhairah, we'll start with you.
Okay, I will say the thing that comes to mind for me is just vulnerability and shattering the concept that just because you have a title or you're a leader that you have it perfect. I am the first to make fun of myself. There's only one version of me you kind of get. It's this version. Sometimes I'm on it. Sometimes I have a tough day. And so I think living that allows other people to feel like they can as well. But you need to do that in balance with holding people accountable, setting clear goals, and driving the results needed to move the business forward. And so I think it's a balance indeed. But I think one of the most important things is shattering the myth of the leader as this stoic, inhumane robot, particularly in this day and age, and particularly within tech. And to bring that humanity, but it also requires courage. I would say I'm still on my journey. I was on an internal work call today. We were talking specifically about the African-American female experience within America, within tech, and the societal pressure to straighten your hair versus wear it curly, and that's something that there's still a lot of stigma around within professional environments. And I can't say I 100%, feel like I want to show up in that way or feel comfortable showing up that way every day. But by starting to have those conversations, I think we edge each of ourselves forward to be more courageous versus cautious. And I think that's a continuum. As leaders, we always are pushing towards that kind of courageous or cautious and where you stand. And I've evolved in that way over time. And I hope my small acts of courage also encourage my team to do the same.
I don't know if you know this, but the Latin origin of the word encourage is to inspire courage. And so clearly you're already there, Zuhairah. Susan, how about you?
Well, I think really to Zuhairah's original point about culture is who you hire, who you fire, who you promote. The org is the combination of the people, and the most impactful thing you can do for culture is hire people who are going to develop the culture you want, right? A respectful culture, a culture of collaboration, of problem solving, of again, of seeing the qualities in one another. But it really is. And well, I'm getting into a topic I know we've all talked about, and also addressing cultural problems when you see them, even when that's hard to prioritize.
So
addressing them like any performance problem.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I would love to hear, I mean, we have all experienced this in the workplace where there are people who are clearly contributing to cultivating healthy workplace culture. And there are people who are clearly consuming or draining the health of our workplace. And so I would love to hear, Susan, do you have an example or advice for other leaders who know they have someone who is draining the culture or not reflecting the values or the desired culture, but is a really good performer?
Yeah, so that's where it's just never okay. And you read books and you hear people say that, but it's very hard to take action on. If someone is, well, Zuhairah was talking about a sales culture, that's very hard, right? Because if someone's bringing the money, it's hard to do something. We've had the experience at Framebridge where people are in just really specialized positions. So you just think like, my gosh, what it would take to recruit someone else. And so when I find myself spending time with a lot of other functional leaders saying, just please accommodate this person because we need them, like you just can't, like then it's on me, we can't. And I think one thing I really noticed was a sign that someone was not right is when you needed sort of the compensating metrics. If you were saying like, try and get this done in 5 days, but don't ignore quality, or do this, but of course keep our people safe. If you have to explicitly say some of those things, if you don't have someone who's aligned enough to know you can't do this by stomping on people, you can't do this on, by diminishing quality, you can't do it, you have like, then the person isn't right. And I think I at times had tried to create either, whether it was more dashboards or more checkpoints or more to try and keep people in a lane who weren't behaving collaboratively enough or positively enough. And it just can't work. And it's too time consuming and ultimately too draining. And so I have a sort of a new belief, which is just you can't be held up, right? You just can't be like, you can never be fearful that someone will leave if that person is not contributing positively to the culture.
Zuhairah, would you like to add anything to that?
I would just add, I've definitely been in the position before where either my boss had a blind spot or I had a blind spot on what, has been coined the brilliant jerk. And it's something that I'm just hypersensitive to now, having been on both sides of that in the past where, you've worked with someone who's seen who's praised as this high performer, and everyone who's ever reported into him knows they're like, it sucks. It's like they're draining, they're not modeling the right behavior, or, being the boss and having someone who's like killing it. And then, a year later saying, oh my God, did you not know that person was just like horrible? Like they were mean spirited, And so for me, it means spending a lot more time 1 and 2 levels below and making myself accessible, right? And also finding the courage within myself when I encounter those situations, when I have to, raise it to my boss and others, that I do speak up in those moments, because in the instances in the past when I didn't find out until much later that many other people were suffering, and the impact was, multiples than what I had realized. And so it's just a watch out that I think about from now on. Is I always think about the counterbalance. We're human. We all have strengths and weaknesses. And, ideally you're in a role where you play to your strengths. But if I don't hear anything about someone, I want to dig, because also as a manager, it's my goal to help them continue to develop and grow, right? Because if not, there also will be a risk in a different way, right? A flight risk, et cetera. But I think that's a good corollary to Susan's point, which is, it happens both above and below you at times. And how do you create the signals or systems so that, you're getting that intel? Because fear is real, and people, if they're working under environments or under managers who create toxic cultures, may not have the privilege, candidly, to speak up or give voice to it, or the confidence or the courage.
Yeah. Zuhairah, you have a great point. 10 out of 10 times, if you separate with someone who is a culture problem, you then then everybody comes and tells you it. But it's, how do you hear that before? How do you make sure you're asking the right questions or sensing the right things before?
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? Is we're starting to hear this year a lot of terms around creating space for teams, right? Like, how do we, especially with all the racial conversations that are happening right now, we're hearing many stories, and I think you used the right term, privilege, Zuhairah, around employees who just don't feel like they can speak up about anything. Race is one example, but a bad manager is another example. Someone who's harassing team members is another example. So I think that leads me to a really important question around, how do we create psychological safety inside the workplace? And I know it's not like there isn't a quick fix to this, right? Like there's so much around building trust, but I'm curious, from your experiences, what are ways in which you've been able to start creating psychological safety to allow your employees to feel less fear about speaking up or sharing experiences that need to be heard by leaders? Susan, we'll start with you.
Well, you can start with me, because I know a time I did not. There's, you need to make sure people can come to you with any challenge. And we had an experience as recently as last year, going into our fourth quarter, which is very big and intense for us. And in sort of the fundraising cycle, it was an important time period for us. And a member of the team came forward and said, based on what I'm seeing in the data, we are going to misplan materially. And it was early in the season. It was, September, October. And I know the meeting, I know where all of us were sitting, and I know what I said. And certainly my reaction was, F and make it work, I think was probably the nature of the reaction. And what the reaction did was stopped people from really looking at the true situation. And so I've taken that, and I talked to everybody about it. Remember that meeting when I basically stopped us from looking at the truth, and how do we not do that again? So I've used it within our organization, but it's just an example of, I think, how you can create a culture where people do not, I'll briefly say, I'm talking about being open sort of with what they're seeing at work. There's obviously open as who you are as a person, which is important and we should talk about. where you can suppress important communication to the detriment of your organization. This morning, actually, I heard something that was sort of the most sickening thing I had heard, which was one of the early congressional reports on what went wrong with the Boeing 737 MAX. And the report detailed a culture of concealment. And I thought, whoa, that is the worst thing. You know, imagine that, like, in that case, it's not only your culture didn't bring out the best in people, your culture put people's lives, it resulted in loss of life. And so I do think that, I don't have all the answers here, but to say absolutely making sure people at all levels feel like they can share what they're seeing and thinking, and that it's valued and there's an audience for it. And if the audience is not their direct supervisor, their audience is somewhere, and that the people are advocating for them and listening to them is critical and an ongoing practice.
Thank you for sharing so vulnerably with all of us that story. You know, what I'm hearing you say, Susan, as kind of a step forward, right, from is recognizing, right, the self-awareness that's so important to have as a leader, to say, you know what, I made a mistake. Someone tried to raise an issue, to raise the flag, and I shut it down because I thought that was better for business. And what the other thing I'm hearing is that you actually are reflecting that back to your team and saying, and admitting, like, hey, all my cards are on the table. I know I did this, and I know that it hurt us, and I'm committing to doing differently going forward. And I think it's not something to just slide past what you just shared. I think self-awareness as a leader is really important, but there's a really critical step beyond, which is to say, I don't know everything. I do mess up. And will you allow me to do better going forward? And so thank you, that's beautiful. Zuhairah, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I also, I think I share with you, Susan, that that modeling is really special. I also don't want to romanticize it. It's also very hard. I mean, you're talking to two senior women, you know, one woman of color. There's a lot of risk that comes with that. There's a lot written about how vulnerability in the workplace is actually what people want, and they need a leader like that. Except when you talk about, you know, women and, people of color. And so I don't want that to go without kind of both sides of that. And I think we need to push cultures forward to allow everyone, you know, to be able to do that in a place, whether they're the CEO or, you know, kind of, a manager or entry manager. To answer your question directly, I think exactly as Susan said, in order to create psychological safety, you have to model psychological safety, right? You have to, and if it doesn't exist within your organization, you have to start where you are and, you know, as I say, be the change you want to be. Again, easier said than done. And so for me, because I see it as a continuum, not a static place, like I got here and yes, you know, it's going to be like this every day. Candidly, it depends on the situation we're talking about, the individual, relative, you know, power dynamics, candidly. And so for me, I like to think about creating the self-awareness and identifying where I am on that continuum of, am I being courageous in this moment or cautious, and just sitting with that and creating that awareness. And then also thinking about the other element that I struggle with is the continuum of truly being compassionate and meeting and seeing that person, you know, where they are, and being critical, right? Because I think particularly as a leader, you can vacillate between those two. You need to drive results. You need to, you know, hold people accountable. And you need to have that balance. And so for me, psychological safety is really born at the intersection of courage and compassion. And it's a continuum for me in identifying where I am, and also how I can nudge myself day by day, or model the nudging into that space. And I think it requires continuous self-work that I hope is transparent enough that others see and commit themselves to doing more of.
I think we all need to pause and just write that down. That psychological safety is born at the intersection of courage and compassion. If you're taking notes, that's a quotable. Remember that. That's a really good statement to meditate on. Thank you, Zuhairah. So, you know, you're both really incredible leaders. And what we see and what I see often as I work with business owners and executives and large team leaders is that they are ultimately very lonely. The top is a lonely place to be. And I think employees often look up and say, oh, you've made it. Like, you've got it all. And what they don't see is that you're shouldering such a large burden, and seeing and hearing so many things without an outlet. And so I am curious how, for the founders and business owners and team leaders on this call, how do you manage the loneliness of this tension, right? Of running a business and all the expectations, as well as trying to cultivate culture that produces well-being for your team. Who do you lean on? What self-care or leader care practices do you engage in? Susan, we'll start with you.
I would agree, incredibly lonely. That just, and how that manifests itself, I think, is one of the reasons I started my own company was because I thought I could do it better from a culture perspective. I had worked so many places and I thought, oh my gosh, I would never do X, Y, or Z as a leader because I just know better. So I'll show them. And then every now and then when I do things that I just think, I can't believe that's happening here in my org, or I can't believe I'm doing that. There are probably, you know, external pressures causing those things to happen. And sometimes they have to happen. Just the external pressures are so great, right? That we had to do something that I wouldn't have ideally written out. And so making those trade-offs is hard. I think for me, it sounds pretty corny, but it absolutely has to be like a centering, that what keeps me going is a centering on what matters, as an org, what we, you know, coming back to sort of vision, taking care of the customer, and even digging deeply into those things. So like we write a thank you note with every frame we write, but that's now centralized. There's a tool, I can see every piece of art going through the system. So if I feel low, going through and seeing what people are sending us, like sort of getting re-energized and realizing sort of what we're all in it for, I think is very helpful. So I'd say that's sort of a business self-care thing I do. Yeah, I guess the other thing, right, that we've been talking about is opening up with other leaders and understanding their comparative strengths, and acknowledging them and asking them to step up because of that comparative strength.
Zuhairah, I'd love to hear from you too on this.
Yes, so I would add two things. My husband, because he has no choice, he has to listen to me. So he is definitely, by marriage, by decree, someone who helps with my self-care. And, you know, when I have those, am I crazy or is this reasonable? And he's usually the one, you know, on my side saying, you know, or pushing me actually, because he knows me when I'm being scared or not being fierce enough or anything along those lines. I would say I've recently taken up exercise as self-care. I only get about 20 minutes on the Peloton, but it is a glorious 20 minutes of just doing something for me, which is really hard to do when you have little people running around. And so those are some of the things that I do for self-care.
It's amazing. I'm not an exerciser, but I am finding more and more that I think I need to force myself to do it, because anytime I'm outside, I just find that like everything clears up for me. And so if I could run or if I could bike or do something that exerts some effort, that drains kind of physical tensions that exist in my body, I feel like from everyone I hear, And someone in the chat is saying amen to the 20-minute Peloton classes.
Yes, and I'm not an exerciser either. It's
not.
COVID and
okay, good. That makes me feel like there's hope. There's hope. Thank you. So, all right. So the reason we designed this session in the culture track was because so many founders of startups struggle with, especially in the growth stage, meeting the needs of their boards and the increasing and ever-changing expectations of their investors while managing their team, right? And that can often create a real tension of like, who's the priority here? Who is the most important stakeholder? Is it the board? Is it our investors? Is it the customer? Is it our employees? And so when we think about culture is the output, right, of all the decisions that are made on the continuum of the employee experience, but also the business experience. So I am curious, what are practical ways that both of you in your experiences have been able to balance prioritizing your stakeholders who are super critical to your business success, like your board and investors, and your team who are super critical to your business success? How have you found ways to balance these stakeholder groups? We'll start with Zuhairah.
Yeah, I tend to orient around the customer, and the reason is I am myself a very purpose-driven person, and so if I'm in a company whose purpose is whatever, fill in the blank, to service the customer, that's an aligning force for me. And I think from there, you can layer on investor performance and also individual employee performance, because we're all, in service, right, to the customer and delivering that ideal experience. That's been really grounding for me. I think where, you come into conflicts is really a testing of your values and your integrity, right? When those things are out of whack, right? If your investor is encouraging behavior that's bad for people, or if your people are encouraging behavior that's bad for the customer, I feel like a lot of those tensions usually become clear when you focus on your reason for being, which is usually for delivering, right, some unique value or service to the customer, and what would be in the benefit of that in the long term, right? So even things like in the midst of COVID, near-term furloughing or layoffs, the business must survive, right, in order to deliver that service. And so that's a orienting mechanism. But we want to make sure that when we build back up, that our employer brand is still, viable, and people felt like they were dealt with in a way that was humane. So you do that with compassion and care.
Yeah. I feel like we keep coming back to reorienting around your why. It's such a grounding and critical part of leading and building culture, especially in crisis. So thanks, Zuhairah. Susan, what's your perspective on this?
I think it's very challenging, especially if you raise venture money. Even if you raise venture money from wonderful people who've invested in a lot of other good companies before, even if they were ever an operator, their role, of course, is a little bit different on your board. So I think it's hard. I wish I had done a better job throughout Framebridge, both asking for time and space for certain things. I had a visual image through so many years of Framebridge of almost like doing a leg press, like trying to keep the pressure off of our organization while we tried to do something the right way. But the pressure for the immediate results is so great. But guiding the board to, we're doing this, and maybe it's a culture initiative, maybe it's a quality initiative, maybe it's something that's a little bit longer term, the right long-term thing for the business, but doesn't fit in the right venture cycle. Like really being a better storyteller about the time period. I wish I had done that better, because certainly when I do, like it's the right thing for the business. And just like, as the leader of the business, you know the most about the business. That being said, I've gotten a lot of terrific advice and learned a lot from other leaders. And so I think almost know what you can or can't get from a board and what you can get from other people who are maybe at your exact stage at the same time. I think you can get a lot, including really robust discussions about people and values and the things actually make a difference, whereas you may be only talking about KPIs in your board meeting.
Yes. Yes. I just want to amen all of that, because I think one thing that you just shared that I think is really critical for any founders, entrepreneurs, even department heads or executives out there, is find peers who are at a similar stage. Sometimes you can't be having these difficult conversations internally. You need to be having these conversations. You need to create a psychologically safe space for yourself, whether that's embedded inside your workplace culture or not, because for you to be an agent for culture change, you need to have space to talk about what's going on and hear from other people what's going on with them and how they're handling it. So that's really valuable advice. Thank you, Susan. So, all right, we're going to talk about like the meat of this, which is around really, Zuhairah said it really well at the beginning. It's something I say a lot around, culture is not what you have written on the walls, but a lot of companies think their culture is embodied in what is written on the walls, and just actually having it. Say again?
Your culture is in the snacks.
Yeah, culture's in the snacks, culture's in the ping pong tables, and like I was saying on Monday, in the nitro brew on tap, right? And I think, the mission of this week is really to expand your thinking about what culture really is and how to cultivate it. And so, we think about values as guiding principles, right? And integrity is around how well I express and act on those guiding principles when no one's looking, right? To what Susan was sharing before. And so, Zuhairah, I would love to hear from you. You have this really interesting experience that we would all love to learn from. You were at Uber and witnessed the transition of leadership from CEO Travis Kalanick to Dara. And I'm curious, what did you notice about the difference in the culture at the company under both leaders as it related to values and how those were exhibited?
Well, let me start by saying, because most people didn't have the opportunity to work at Uber. The Uber was when I was there, a very special place, a place where you had super, I think well-intentioned, high-performing, driven, visionary folks wanting to change the world, and building a product that they thought were going to have a positive impact overall for the business. Overarching that, you also had some cultural issues that are now very public, right? Made headlines, even books have been written about it. And so I think it is a good question, because I think Dara, since he's come on, has made a lot of decisions to intentionally move the culture in a different direction. But I think it's important to understand it in the context in which the company was started, right? So an industry where there had not been disruption, where there were no rules on the books on how to regulate this new form of transportation, really innovating a new category. And so the values that were in place when I joined in 2013 were ones that were about, going against the status quo, right? Being fierce, stepping on toes, principled confrontation, meritocracy, these very, almost like warrior, kind of values. You were suiting up, you were getting ready to go to battle to make change. And I think a lot of us believe that that was what was required in order to bring about the change, but also I think felt right in that work, and that this was, for the most part, in terms of ride sharing, an industry that needed to be birthed because of the benefit it could have for, you know, riders and drivers, but also the logic as to why, you know, someone could, you know, use their car to deliver a sandwich, but couldn't use their car to deliver a person. It just fell on deaf ears. And so where I think things went wrong in some ways with the values weren't necessarily in the values themselves, but the way in which they were weaponized, candidly, when you have a ultra competitive and fierce group of high performers who, you know, are rewarded for results and growth at all cost. And one of the things that I think Dara did pretty early on, you know, was to reevaluate the cultural values and to get to the essence of the behavior that you want to actually reinforce. And kind of taking a step back a bit from this, you know, warrior mentality. So for instance, one of the values of principled confrontation, at the essence of that is principled, right? And the belief that you're doing the right thing, right? So that value, you know, morphed into something more along, we do the right thing, right? Which is what I think was a rallying cry around a lot of what people felt energy towards in those early days. And so I think the lesson learned for me is in setting cultural values, it's thinking about the behaviors you want to reinforce, and ensuring when you look at them that you've thought about the extremes on both sides, right? And you are correcting towards the ones you actually want to multiply, and you're specific about that. And I think that is, even though the words are sometimes just tweaks of the values that were there before, it makes a big difference in terms of how people show up and the behaviors they exhibit within the organization.
Thank you. So we're running close to time. I do want to close with one more question before we go into Q&A. Getting really, really practical around specific favorite examples of yours, rituals, processes, systems that you've put in place for your teams that have brought your values to life, right? Like, just like Zuhairah was saying, like, how do we align the value with a real ritual behavior as an organization, and bring it to life? Susan, I'd love to hear from you first.
You know, I think in response to sort of 2020, we got to sort of live our values, which one of them is a sort of hustly one, adapt and act, while also doing good. And so we were able as a company to make face shields, convert our factory to make face shields. And then we also very quickly responded with an action plan in response to Black Lives Matter movement. We're a week away, I think, from going live with a cool Black artist print shop. But we stood up 3 lanes that we really put sort of company energy behind. And I would just say what I was proud of is that they sort of, before we could even do, neither of those initiatives had a business plan behind them. They both had, people want to do it, we could show up right now. If we move fast, it's more authentic. It's showing our team that we can come together and do stuff. And both of those things allowed our teams to feel pride in where they worked.
Yeah, that's a really good example of sometimes realigning or rethinking how you do your work, what you're channeling your team's energy towards, is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than an internal culture initiative or ritual that you might use to augment your business strategy. So I think that's an amazing example. Zuhairah, I'd love to hear any favorite rituals that you have in leading a team that you feel bring values to life at Expedia.
I just try to take myself back to the time when we think about the last kind of movement in our nation around particularly racial justice issues, right? The civil rights movement. And I think now we all look at it and say, oh, yes, the March on Washington, you know, this was this time where everyone agreed, how could these bad things happen? And I remember that at the time that Martin Luther King was alive, right before his death, his approval rating in the US was actually, his disapproval rating was over 60%. So most of the country was not on the side of the civil rights movement. And so for me, that provides context and it's grounding for me in terms of what actions we take today, not only from a racial justice standpoint, but from a global pandemic standpoint. And it pushes me to be more courageous and brave in the actions that we take because, again, being a purpose-driven person, when my time on this planet is done, I want to be able to look back and say that I did all that I could and that I'm proud of the actions that I took. And so the practical thing that I do is just remind myself of that historic context and then question myself on what I can do in whatever sphere that I enter into to be courageous, to have the conversation, to push the conversation forward, bit by bit.
I love that because that requires a centering of your own humanity and belief system with how you approach your leadership and your team. So that's really powerful. Thank you. So this has been an amazing conversation. I feel like we could probably talk for a few more hours. I'd love to be able to address a few of the questions. So we can do these rapid fire. I'll just point them towards one of you so that we can cover as many as possible. Does that work for both of you? Okay, amazing. So Susan, you mentioned mental health. We have a question from someone. Are there any specific resources you've used to help employees address their mental health?
You know, we actually just plussed up our EAP, which comes with your health benefits and is normally a really bad resource. We found a better one that does give 6 free therapy hours to every team member, and then a referral onto a therapist covered by our insurance. So we did that and rolled that out to everyone at every level of the org. Otherwise, it's sort of what I said before, which is just, I have been trying to tell every manager, it is my expectation of you that you have explicit conversations with people about how are they doing. And then we have done sort of pulse checks with people saying, literally, has your manager asked how you're doing? Has your manager suggested an accommodation in your schedule? Has your manager, and it seems like being that prescriptive of our expectation is necessary to sort of pierce through at this time.
Yeah, I love that level of accountability. You're not just leaving it to chance that they actually deliver on that. Zuhairah, this is, I'm gonna ask a less big question. Would love to hear any particularly effective approaches you have developed for team building activities, especially in this virtual era.
Oh, wow. I am not a gamer, but playing games, and I'm not talking video games, I'm talking like Uno, old card games. There's some fun games in the time between 0 and 5 minutes into a meeting where, you're waiting for everyone to dial in, where you can do rapid fire trivia. Those things have been a great way to inject a little bit of fun, levity, and humanity during times. And so that's what I would say is a practical tip.
Love that. All right, we'll do one more. How do you, and Susan, I'll ask you, how do you find the balance of flexibility and structure when it comes to team members who are also parents during this difficult time?
Yeah, this is a hard one. This is a hard one. I think for us, well, I'll talk to our corporate team, which is probably most like most people who work here, where we can give more flexibility. We've just asked people to mark on their calendar, literally. And so I have tried to help with that, to literally like Lila School, block it out. Mark on their calendar blocks where they are helping people on to new Zoom classes. And again, one thing we asked people to explicitly do was to revisit every single standing meeting to make sure the times still work for people. Normally, we would not disrupt the entire company because of your personal need, but this time we have to, right? People are in situations that are just impossible. So that's just a minor one, but truly, if the standing meeting's at 9 and that doesn't work for anyone because they're logging on to Zoom school, make it 10.
Yeah, I think meetings often are like the missing link when looking at a really tactical but fundamental key to unlocking people's time and creating flexibility, looking at the way you do meetings and which meetings are essential and how do you record them. I've heard that a lot of people started recording meetings to create more flexibility for parents who can't attend them. So really incredible insights from both of you, Susan and Zuhairah. I am so grateful that you made time for our entire community. This session is going to be recorded and shared with so many more people. Thank you both. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for the great questions. We'll be sharing lots of tools and tips in the recap guide, which is coming out next week. And since we've gone over a little bit of time, I won't pull up any more slides, but we hope to see you in our next sessions tomorrow. We actually have one on remote work and the future of remote work and ways to engage your team that way. And then also self-care and team care and actually how to create space and normalize talking about mental health in the workplace. So join us for those sessions. Thank you both so incredibly much. This has been wonderful.
Bye.
Take care. Have a great day. Bye.